From the ivory towers of Canada's universities to the halls of provincial parliament and even the House of Commons, we have heard leftist activists frequently invoke the term decolonization to justify outrageous and oftentimes ridiculous policies having to do with Indigenous people in Canada. Decolonization has become a catch-all phrase to include actions that involve breaking the law, such as burning down churches, toppling 100-year-old statues, blocking railway lines, and going on axe attacks at gas pipeline facilities. But decolonization also apparently is any act of pro-Indigenous activism at all, including those very important land acknowledgements. To say that the word decolonization has become mainstream in Canadian politics would be an understatement. But in the wake of the terrorist attack against Israel carried out by Hamas militants, leftists at Canadian universities and even at provincial legislatures, such as the Ontario NDP's Sarah Jama, believe that the word decolonization, it turns out, also includes the actions of Hamas on that horrendous day just 10 days ago. The indiscriminate killing of innocent civilians, women, children, and the elderly. As student unions, professors, and politicians all seek to justify such atrocities in the name of decolonization, as many have argued and as I will argue today, it's time that we take these lunatics seriously when they use the word decolonization, and it's time that we were all awake to what decolonization in their minds really means. Drop a like in the video, help us out by subscribing to the True North YouTube channel, and the common question for the episode is this: what does decolonization mean to you? Let me know in the comments, and let's get into it. As has been said many times before, it's frankly astonishing that we have so many people who live in this country who think it's appropriate to parade in the streets not even 24 hours after terrorists slaughter thousands of civilians. But let's be honest, the ship has sailed when it comes to not having such people come into the country in the first place, thanks to, of course, reckless immigration policies and an absolute die-hard refusal to cultivate any sort of Canadian identity or culture while importing millions of people into our country. Look, that's an argument that many will have over the coming weeks, and I think it's a worthwhile discussion. But there is something more concerning on the horizon, and it has been pointed out by quite a few commentators already. This is this idea of decolonization that we hear from so many on the left, so many in the universities, and of course, our politicians. That what was carried out by Hamas, those atrocities, were done so in the name of decolonization and fighting back the oppressor. And if people are going to justify those atrocities in another country in the name of decolonization, while at the same time using the same word to justify their actions here in this country, I think, as many have pointed out, it is time we start to pay attention to what these people are saying. Within just days of the Hamas terrorist attack, students at York University who are involved in the student union thought it would be wise to publish their statement in solidarity with Palestine. From Turtle Island to Palestine and across all occupied lands, these events serve as a reminder that resistance against colonial violence is justified and necessary. This is decolonization and land back actualized, and we continue to see the Palestinian people stand firm in their resistance against their oppressors. This is decolonization and land back actualized. Really? This is what decolonization looks like? This is what land back looks like? Those are just students. Here's some professors as well. Here's what a University of Toronto professor had to say on decolonization. As Hawaiians wake up to the news of Palestinian anti-colonial resistance in Gaza to Israeli settler colonialism, remember that from Hawaii to Palestine, occupation is a crime. A lahui that stands for decolonization and deoccupation should also stand behind freedom for Palestine. And just for another example of professors using this language in the justification of what Hamas did to Israeli civilians, here is an associate professor from McMaster, likely a member of QP 3906, who put out a statement the day after the Hamas attack saying, "Long live the resistance." Here is what Emil J. Joseph, he, him, had to write about decolonization. Post-colonial, anti-colonial, and decolonial are not just words you heard in your EDI workshop. Oh, then, if they're not words in an EDI workshop, Emil J. Joseph, he, him, what are they exactly? If they're not just the words that you use in the EDI workshops that you likely run, if they're not just words that are spoken in our legislatures and parliament, then what do they mean? It sounds like, according to this professor, that decolonization is what Hamas has done to Israeli civilians. Don't worry, by the way, they've got the exact same problem in the United States and, of course, in the UK. If the mass protests celebrating the Hamas terrorist attack over the weekend weren't enough to convince you, here's what Columbia University professor Wala Aksia had to say about decolonization. Academics like to decolonize through discourse and land acknowledgements. Time to understand that decolonization is not a metaphor. Decolonization means resistance of the oppressed, and that includes armed struggle to literally get our lands and lives back. And the protesters at these Palestine rallies, if anyone was mistaken, think the exact same thing. They do believe that what happened to Israeli civilians was an act of decolonization. Here's a picture of a protester at a rally in Canada for Palestine. Notice the Carleton University jacket this woman is wearing, and of course the mask. Decolonization is not just a theory. And at this protest in Britain, conveniently placed right beside the posters with socialist worker action on them, you have this woman holding up a sign which says, decolonization is not just a metaphor. Most notably, I would say, is a statement from NDP provincial parliamentarian Sarah Jama from Hamilton. 3 days after Israel was attacked and after they declared war on Hamas, Sarah Jama, from her provincial parliamentarian seat in Hamilton, decided that she had the authority to call for a ceasefire over a war on the other side of the world. Sarah Jama released a statement on October 10th saying that she's reflecting on her role as a politician in the settler colonial system of Canada. For 75 years, violence and retaliation rooted in settler colonialism have taken the lives of far too many innocent people. And by the way, in case anyone wasn't exactly sure who exactly are the colonizers and settlers on this country in which these leftists so frequently invoke the term decolonization, not just when it comes to Palestine, but into Canada's context, those settlers and colonizers, that would be you and me watching this show. Anyone who does not conform to their ideology, anyone who does not believe that this country is a racist country, the people in power are oppressing minority groups. If you don't believe that, you are a settler, and you are carrying out so-called settler colonial violence on everybody else. That's the ideology here when people talk about decolonization. And if we're really getting down to it, when they say decolonize, they want white Canadians out of positions of power. That's who they believe are the settler oppressors in this country. Just as they believe that Jews in Israel are the oppressors in that country of Palestinians. Or you to believe that the same people who use the word decolonization have a different definition for when they use the word in Canada versus when they use the word in Israel? I think if we believe that, we're being completely naive. I want to highlight this article written in the National Post by someone who I would consider to be not a conservative at all, really, but someone who nonetheless has taken issue with the word decolonization and has raised alarm bells about it. This is written by Tasha Kiridan in the National Post. Jama's statement illustrates the absurd lengths to which the decolonization movement has been taken. Today, the word decolonization has lost all meaning. It has become a trope for overthrowing whatever order someone finds offensive. Decolonize Palestine of Jews. Decolonize Canada of white people. Decolonize language of words that might cause offense. Decolonize the math curriculum of Eurocentric, quote, ways of knowing. Never mind that much of modern mathematics was developed by Arabic mathematicians. History doesn't matter, only dogma does. And this was written in The Hub by Howard Anglin. There is a smaller group for whom the idea of decolonization has a harder edge. They welcome it as a chance to turn the tables on our country's historically dominant European majority, not by supplementing our traditional symbols with new ones, but by disparaging them as shameful and displacing them. These are the people who saw the burning of churches 2 summers ago and took pains to explain why the often Indigenous congregations had it coming. They are motivated by a retributive impulse that is often indistinguishable from revenge, or in the case of the white progressives who make up much of this class, masochistic self-flagellation. Unfortunately, this group is the movement's avant-garde. Their energy and ideas drive and direct the policies in practice, while the well-meaning are carried along because they don't have the words or courage to distinguish their good intentions from this destructive agenda. There is buried within this last group a hardcore faction that would go even further. When they talk about decolonization, they mean it literally, with all its blood-soaked consequences. Symbolic change won't cut it for them. They want action. As JJ McCullough pointed out on Twitter over the past few days about the decolonization movement, I am a little bit troubled by the fact that decolonization, a very mainstream concept in modern Canadian political discourse, is understood by at least some factions of Canadians to mean indiscriminate extrajudicial killing. Just a little troubled by that. And this is not to say that everyone who uses the word actually wants to exact bloodthirsty revenge on Canadians, on people who they believe to be oppressing them. But it is to say that those who do believe that have succeeded mightily in getting their words, their terminology, used and spoken inside the House of Commons.
We've had many conversations around dismantling white supremacy and decolonizing our spaces, including this one, right here in the House of Commons.
To bring justice, to bring healing, to bring peace, we have to decolonize in the fullest sense of the term. That is where the gaping wound begins. Decolonizing can be a scary word for some, but what's really scary, Madam Speaker, is the reality that Indigenous women in Canada have to wonder if they're next.
From ending poverty to housing, action rooted in the absolute need for decolonization.
I believe, in fact, that there's a lot of work to do to decolonize our systems, to address key issues like systemic racism, ableism, white privilege, and how these institutions continuously leave out workers, the poor, persons with disabilities, members of the LGBTQ2+ communities, and people from the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities.
Let us build strong equity, diversity, inclusion, and decolonization strategies in the Canadian public service.
The people who talk about decolonization have a desire to destroy the country in which they are living in. They believe the people in charge are colonizing them, so they are actively trying to destroy Canada. People who use that language, decolonization. And we've seen it. Again, the signs at the protests which say decolonization is not just a metaphor, it's not just something you read in your DEI workshops. Well, that's true because we've seen what decolonization looks like. It involves burning down churches across the country. It involves vandalizing and toppling 100-year-old statues of the people that have helped Indigenous lives in this country, namely that of Egerton Ryerson. A man whose true legacy is unimpeachable, even by today's standards. An honest person could never accuse someone like Egerton Ryerson of being some sort of colonizer to the Indigenous people, but that didn't matter, because it's not about that. It's about destruction of the country in which they live in. Want another example of what decolonization in Canada looks like? What about the axe attack on the Coastal GasLink pipeline project, which because it happened during the Freedom Convoy received basically no news at all? As many have said, I think it's time that we start to take it seriously when people in positions of authority start using the word decolonization in this country. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for us today on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Harrison Faulkner, and this is Ratio.